Fabulous. Lorraine, thank you so much for joining us today. It's really, really valuable to have you with us and to hear about your experiences. Lorraine, could you tell us a little bit of introduction about who you are and about Hub for Success and what it is that you guys do?
Yeah, of course, and I'm equally delighted to be here today. So yeah, my name's Lorraine and I'm the manager of the Hub for Success. We're based in Edinburgh, although we're a collaboration which is really important to us. So we're a group of 5 universities, 2 colleges and 1 local authority. And although I'm employed by Edinburgh Napier University, I'm hosted within a social work team. I'm a social worker to background myself. I'm also a leader with lived experience of care. So that to you in the wider British system means people who have been in the care system in Scotland. What we do in a nutshell is we do 2 really important things, is we work with individual people of all ages to help them get in, stay in or return to education. And we also lobby on the other side, and we try and create change within our institutions so that we are getting institutions to change rather than expecting our individual people with experience of care to change. So we've been around since 2018. We're fairly new, we're fairly small, but I think we pack a big punch in terms of what we do. And since we began in 2018, we've worked with over 300 people with experience of care. So what I bring today is what they tell us works and what they think is good. So yeah, delighted to be in the room, as I said.
That's brilliant. Thank you. What a great introduction. One of the reasons that we wanted to invite you here today is because a lot of the work that you do involves hearing directly from the young people that you're working with. So I was wondering if you could start by telling us a little bit about how care experienced young people are actively involved in the governance or the strategic design of your organisation at those top levels to start with.
Of course, yeah. So without boring you with the detail, we have a simple structure and it's a 3B process. So we have an advisory board, which is made up of our principals of our institutions and strategic people across our organisations who have a governance role for the organisations, but who also help us lead and direct that. We also have a steering group of practitioners on the ground who work on a day-to-day basis with care experienced people and students. But most importantly, we have what's called our Learner Advisory Board, and that's made up of a group of students with lived experience who are part of our structure organisationally. So how do they get involved in the work that we do on an organisational basis, and how do they help us guide and direct where we want to go? Well, when we were creating our strategic plan, our first protocol was to go to our students with lived experience. What do you want the hub to do? Tell us what you think is right, and how do we get the best out of that? And then that process was taken up to our advisory board, and they maybe said, actually, we don't want you to do this. We don't want you to work so much with individuals. And we brought that back to our Learner Advisory Board. And they said, actually, no, we disagree. We do want this to go in this way. And it went back again through that 3-way process until we got an agreed plan. So as part of our DNA, the Learner Advisory Board is only one formal structure, but we also record every single piece of work we do and we analyse that data. So if the people with lived experience are telling us over 60% of the time, I've got a problem with finance, this is causing us loads of issues, we don't have to keep going back and ask the same questions. We go back and say, look, can we come up with some ideas together about how we challenge this? So I'll say this again and again, people with lived experience and voice is at the heart of what we do. We question everything within our organisation. Anything that we do, anything we think of, what do our students think? Let's ask them. What do our care experienced children in primary school think? How can they tell us what they think matters? It's not rocket science, it's just part of what we do. If you get to a stage within your own organisations where that's always your question, what do the people who we serve think, then you're on the right road. So we do a bit of both. To explain it really simply, we involve voice, we involve lived experience in things like all our interviews, regardless of what the post is, we have to have people with lived experience. We are co-designing our projects, so we have 3 strategic groups that are designing the projects. People with lived experience are on those groups. Paid posts. We employ student ambassadors as well. We pay them for their time. We actually pay them a higher rate of pay than student ambassador would normally get, and that's in recognition that our students play quite a unique roles. They have a foot in the world of trying to influence further in higher education, but they also try to influence the social work sector. So we do a bit of both. We have our Learner Advisory Board, which is voluntary, and we also pay students to come in and influence the work that we do with our stakeholders. So they're the beating heart of our work. We couldn't do what we do without them telling us. So they just bring the beauty and the learning that we need. Every day is learning for us. And if we're getting something wrong or right, they will tell us openly and honestly and transparently.
That's absolutely brilliant. There's lots going on, isn't there? It's not just one thing that you have. You're not ticking any boxes there for the sake of it. They are fully a part of your embedded into your organisation, which is just fantastic. Can I ask another question about the Learner Advisory Board? How have you chosen who those young people will be, and how often do they meet, and how often do you meet with them?
Yeah, so we didn't choose young people. What we did is we have the beauty of the collaboration. So we invited people to nominate themselves for our advisory board, and we sent that information out via our partners directly to people who were with lived experience within the institutions, and they nominated themselves to come forward, and then we set up the group and invited people along, saying this is what it's going to be like. It'll obviously be in partnership with you. This is just first meeting, but what we are kind of hoping for is that you are able to guide and steer the direction of our organisation. So through that initial contact, we then formed a group of key students who would come and meet with us. At the beginning, it was on a more regular basis. It was every couple of weeks, so we got to know each other. We would always make a point of breaking bread together. Food was really important, so we'd get round the table, we'd eat together, we'd chat. It's relationship based, it's getting to know people. And it's finding a space where we trust each other. So relationship-based practice is always key. If you want to have voice at the heart, it has to be relationship-based. So that carried on throughout and pre-COVID, and we would meet regularly. And what we would do is look at what was going on organisationally and bring it to our students. Now, it did take time, and it took compassion, and it took commitment, because often the students we are working with have experienced the hard end of care. So they've come into the room going, oh, this was really difficult. You have to build in time to allow those conversations to happen before you get into the real work of why we're here today. And also at the end, it's like, if you're writing an essay, you have a beginning, a middle and an end. You start with the beginning, you hear where people are at, we get people comfortable in the room, we get on task, we really decide what we want to do about it. At the end, we just tie up by going, okay, what's next? And how are you feeling? And making sure that we are regularly in contact. So it's not just a case of turning up to the Learner Advisory Board, it's always phone calls in the middle. How are you doing? How's your studies going? Where are you at? We're checking in for you for the next meeting. Was it good fun for you? And it has to be fun. And it has to be in a way led by what they want. And sometimes it'll go off in a direction and a tangent, and you just have to have the right people in the room to help you bring your students back in and on task. So not only are they involved just in the Learner Advisory Board, those voices are taken up to our advisory board. When our governance are saying, maybe we want to do this differently, we'll go, okay, but we'll go and ask the Learner Advisory Board first. And there's been situations where it's been quite tense, and our advisory board has wanted to change the structure of the organisation. We've taken that to our Learner Advisory Board, and they've said absolutely not. And the beauty of it is that we went back and we've said, this is the people with lived experience who want it to work in this way, and I'm sorry, but we can't change it in the way you want. We need to stick to what people are telling us on the ground. So they have real strength and voice, and that voice is taken seriously. So it takes time, takes relationships, takes commitment, takes a bit of fun, bit of bread breaking, getting in the room together, doing fun activities. But oh my God, is it worth it at the end? The beauty that you get out of that, and the direction, and it gives you credibility. You know, if anybody's challenging your practice, it's not me from the Hub for Success, it's not Lorraine saying, this is what needs to change. This is your students, people who are living and breathing, that are telling you this is what can make it better.
That's so valuable, isn't it, to be able to have that, and that depth of meaningful participation. Absolutely wonderful. So that's how you kind of operate as a organisational structure. When it comes to your actual specific projects, how do young people inform the project design? How are they involved in the management of it or the evaluation of it?
Yeah, we always get asked this question. I'm going to start answering the end of your question first, Ashley, because I think that's the most interesting bit. How do you evaluate? You know, so let's stop thinking of evaluation as an end product. You should evaluate in action. You should be constantly listening to what people are telling you as you go along. It doesn't have to be a big, fancy, structured evaluation. Let's sit down and look at and speak to people. Listen as you're going along. Pay attention to what's happening in the room. Think about what people are telling you and be open and honest about that. The amount of times I've had to stop myself in my track and say to a student, oh my God, that's amazing what you've just said. And I'm really sorry if I don't write this down in my wee notebook, I'm going to forget. And do you mind if I take a note of that? Because that will help me when I go back and need to change how things are working. So evaluation and action is key to us. Change things as you're going, listen as you're going. Don't wait until the end for a list of recommendations or a way to do things. Yeah, evaluation at the end has its place, but let's capture that as we're going. So that to us, I suppose, is key. In terms of how we have worked together, so I don't see it as we involve you students, we co-design and co-develop. So our schools work programme has 3 groups of parties who are designing the project. Each of those groups has a student with lived experience in their own right, not there to bring their personal experience of what's happened to them, but to say this is what I think will work, and to disagree and agree and to formulate the end plan. So co-design is key to us. I'll take us back to the same thing again. Always question what you're doing. Make it part of your DNA. If you don't have a student in front of you or a child, a young person in front of you, even just take a step back and think about what they may think of something. Listen more and assume less is really key. And just bear in mind that you might have to agree to disagree at times. Children and young people are not a homogenous group. They will have differences of opinions. And part of the process of participation and meaningful decision making and co-design is recognising that we might not agree, but at least we've all been involved in the conversation to get us to the next step. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yes, very much so. That's really interesting. Thank you. So obviously there's a lot of very, very rich information that comes out of this, and it informs your projects, and it means that they are really, truly, genuinely user-led and child-led. But obviously that must come up with a lot of challenges along the way for that. It was interesting earlier that you mentioned that your top board often get challenged by your learner advisory board, which I can imagine might feel really hard to do. So what would you say are the biggest challenges, but also the biggest opportunities that you find in doing this? And be honest about that, because there's a lot of people here, I think, who will be listening to this and thinking that sounds amazing, but how do you even do this, and and envisaging all the problems that could possibly go wrong with it as well.
Yeah, I suppose there's some really interesting work happening in Scotland just now called reframing. So just think about it from a really simplistic perspective. Think about the beauty in it rather than the challenges. So for me, being honest at the outset, if you want to do something well, it's going to take time. So always factor that in. Don't see that, oh, I've not got enough time. That is just part of your project. Taking time to get something off the ground, to do it properly, needs investment from the very beginning, as in, we're going to have to resource this. And I suppose for me, the bit that's really key in terms of the challenges is you have to be, as an organisation, a bit vulnerable. So you have to open up your vulnerabilities, and that's very different from taking risks. So if you want to learn and you want to make something happen, you have to challenge yourself and allow yourself to be in a vulnerable space where you try things and they might not work, and that's all right. But at least you've got in front of your students, you've got in front of your children, you've tried it and said, let's give this a bash. Oh, it didn't work, but what have we learned from that? There's always learning in every challenging situation. So be vulnerable. So, give yourself to that space where it might not get it right, and that's okay, but we still learn from that. I always far outweigh the opportunities when I think about the challenges. So in terms of governance, if you're worried about governance or people challenging you about how you've involved voice or why that person was involved in an interview, just come at it from the angle of, well, why not? Why would you not have people with lived experience and telling you what's going to work best? And this is what other people have told us. So always hold on to that when you're feeling maybe that vulnerability, and don't lose sight of that. One of the things I say from an organisational perspective is, have you got the right people in the room? So if you want to really and truly involve children, young people in meaningful participation, your people are your key asset. Your strategy and your structure of your organisation comes after that. But if you've got the right people in the room, then you're going to have meaningful participation. So that might sound a bit counterproductive, but if you have the right people in the room, they're naturally going to be good at consulting with children and young people and respecting their rights. Children and young people have a right to have their voices heard. Back to what I said before, it doesn't mean to say you might get the outcome you want, but you've been in a room where you've been in a space where you've talked it over and thought it through and agreed and disagreed. So the opportunities of co-design are just incredible. Give it a bash. Take the time, take the energy, give it a bash. If you open a door and it shuts in your face, find another one, find a different way of doing things. There's always a solution to something, to an answer. And I'll bring you back to a point again. If you are consulting with children and young people, if you are involving them in decision making, that gives you credibility to your organisation. How can anybody argue against what people with lived experience or children and young people who are living in that moment are telling you works? It gives you credibility as an organisation. So when you're opening up to be that vulnerability, remember the credibility is there at the end. It's worth it.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure about the English sector, but I certainly know with the Promise in Scotland, which is a huge transformational change in about the way we say voice is at the centre of that. And they've led by delivering a huge review of our whole situation with having voice at the centre of that. So yeah, put your vulnerability out there and give it a bash.
It sounds really exciting, the work that's happening there. And I've heard you talk before about the promise, and there's so much potential with that as well. And it sounds like everything is really heading in a really positive direction with this at the moment, in Scotland particularly. I thought that was really interesting what you just said there, though, at that point about actually how you might not get the outcome that you had originally wanted or had originally planned. And that's really interesting, because I think often we can start with a really clear idea in our head, can't we, of how we want this project to look or how we want our organisation to go, and actually being able to hold that lightly and make sure and reassess who it is that is actually developing that outcome or developing that idea of where you want to go is quite challenging to do that, because you can have such a clear idea in your head of the direction that you want to go in. So I think that's really valuable to hear that from you again. Are there any other kind of final words of wisdom that you have, any advice you'd give to an organisation that's looking to increase the way that children can meaningfully participate in the decisions that affect their lives through both their projects or their organisations?
Yeah, so I suppose the work that we do at the Hub for Success didn't grow from just me coming in as a manager and thinking this was the right thing to do. Prior to that, I worked for an organisation called Who Cares Scotland, who are all about voice. It is the beating heart of what they do. So I brought that experience into the room. And I suppose if you're thinking about meaningful participation, advocacy is a great model and way to think about how you involve children and young people in the decisions about your organisation or about what they think should work. So when you're thinking about the advocacy model, remove yourself from the decision-making role. Yeah, you might have really great ideas about what you think might work for your organisation, but put yourself in that vulnerable space where you're willing to be challenged from people who have a very different perspective. So the advocacy model, I think the beauty of that is don't put yourself in a decision-making role. You don't have to make the decisions at the outset. So when you're thinking about your project or your organisation, try not to think in too linear terms. Try to do some blue sky thinking. What would children and young people really want? Because see, if you get yourself stuck in the not blue sky thinking, you won't ever progress. And I've learned that through working directly with children and young people in very formal decision-making structures, so in legal circumstances where they've very serious decisions have had to be made about their lives. And I've worked with very young children, and the answers are there. There's loads of tools on the internet, there's loads of activities you can do, there's lots of ideas, but ultimately it's the people in the organisation, the right people, who will bring those ideas to life and who will make meaningful participation of children and young people a real thing. Fun-based, creative, using what you've got in front of you if you don't have lots of resources. When it's very young children, play is the best way to involve children and young people. It doesn't have to be structured formal consultation or that kind of bums on seats, get you in the room and let's hear what you've got to say. Back to what I said at the beginning, evaluation in action is also participation in action. Constantly asking as part of your day-to-day work, and doing that in a fun, play-based way for younger children is really key.
Yeah. Lorraine, this has been absolutely fascinating and so helpful. Thank you very much for your time on this. I really, really do appreciate it. You're going to be staying around to answer some questions from the rest of the grants workshop attendees. So thank you very much for that. And yeah, thank you for your time. It's been brilliant.
Thank you for your time. You're welcome.